Your host for the Prophecy Club, Stan Johnson.
Welcome to the Prophecy Club, where we study and research Bible prophecy. Our topic tonight is the medical conspiracy. Now, before I even introduce the speaker, before we even get started, let me just say I'm not against, nor is your speaker, against the medical establishment. Nor are we against doctors, nor are we against surgery and things like that. There are things that they do that are very, very helpful. They save a lot of people's lives. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is evil, wherever it may be found. Be it behind a pulpit in a church, or be it behind a radio mic, or be it behind a television camera, or be it at the doctor's office. And what we're going to be discussing tonight is some evil that does exist in the American medical system. Obviously, if we're the world's richest nation, so they say, then we should be the healthiest people. And yet, we're among the sickest. As a matter of fact, at this very moment, I'm battling some kind of bronchitis that is trying to get the victory, and I say that the herbs and the vitamins are going to get the victory along with Jesus. Amen. So we're always battling something, it seems like, in America. So your speaker tonight is a nutritional herbologist. He's been studying herbs for some 30 years. He's a certified natural health professional and a doctor of naturopathy. He's going to reveal how the ruling elite stole healing and medicine from the church and set up an evil cabal, an evil medical establishment to withhold cures and to reduce the population. Oh, they certainly wouldn't do that. Well, what does the Bible say about the devil? He comes not but for to kill, to steal, and to destroy. He's going to explain the iron triangle, how the Federal Drug Administration, the drug companies, and the medical schools collude together to control your health. And he's also going to teach you how herbs can be a superfood to strengthen your immune system to make up for what is lacking in your diet. Will you help me welcome Bill Schneblin? Welcome, Bill.
Thanks. Well, it's once again great to be here. Praise God. This is a little bit different kind of subject matter than what I usually talk about, and in a way, I'm delighted that the Lord released me to be able to talk about some of this, because it's actually a very personal subject for me, and I think if you think about it, it is for all of us, because our health is personal. I mean, if we're sick, basically it takes some of the joy out of our life. It makes us less effective as witnesses, as soldiers, if you will, in the struggle that we're all in, because we understand we are talking about spiritual warfare. And so what the devil wants to do, as Stan says, is keep us sick, is keep us under the weather. And in my personal situation, as many of you may know, I spent many years as a witch before I was saved. And a lot of people, they think witch, they think herbs, that witches do herbs, and there's a lot of truth in that, certainly. Now, after I got saved, some Christians were telling me, well, herbs are evil, and vitamins are evil, and they're part of witchcraft, and you shouldn't take them anymore. And I actually had this one Pentecostal preacher pray for me to be set free from the spirit of pharmacopoeia, which is, it's the Greek word for, I don't know if it's where we get our word pharmacy. But if you look in the Old Testament, where in Exodus it says, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Well, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek supposed Old Testament, the word is pharmacopoeia there, or pharmakeia, which means one who deals in poisons. That's what the word actually means. So anyhow, you can tell that to your pharmacist next time you see him. So I got rid of all of this stuff that I was doing, because I was actually in reasonably good health. I was kind of a health nut, and I went to the health food store and was taking vitamins and niacin and herbs and stuff. And so and then when I got especially into full-time ministry, because our ministry is taxing. It's very demanding physically. And I started getting sick a lot. I mean, I was getting the flu, and I was getting a cold a couple times a year, and I was just generally feeling kind of draggy. And then in 1993, I got kidney stones, which was no fun. And so I started kind of rethinking this stuff, and I began to realize that herbs, I mean, it says in the Bible, in Genesis, that God gave us herbs to be meat. That it's part of what God gave us. I mean, obviously, if the Lord made it, it says that He made everything good. So right off the bat, I thought there's something wrong with this idea that all these things are wrong or are satanic. So we did a lot of study, my wife and I. We spent literally years researching these issues, and came to understand that actually there's a healthy biblical way to live according to the Bible that involves eating what God gives us and not eating man-made garbage. The other thing that happened was a crisis in my life was that my father went through the grindings of the medical system. I mean, he lived his whole life in relatively good health, especially for someone who smoked, and really lived to a fairly vigorous early 80s. And then all of a sudden he started getting heart pains. And so what did they say? Oh, you've got to have an angioplasty. And of course, that's the thing where they stick a balloon down into whatever artery or vein is being, blocked, and they blow up the balloon. And what that's supposed to do is kind of gush or smash the whatever's blocking the vein into the wall of the artery and open it up. It's slightly like a roto-rooter, but not really. And and like almost everybody who has an angioplasty, within a year, he had to have coronary bypass surgery. He had to have a quadruple bypass. And that's a very arduous procedure. It's not one I would really recommend anybody go through. Because, they saw open your chest. They basically take a vein out of your leg and try to put it in your heart. And within 9 months, he was dead. After that, he got cancer. And the last maybe week to 10 days of his life, he was in just horrible pain. And there wasn't a lot they could do because, see, the FDA forbids doctors from giving a certain amount of cocaine, morphine to patients because they might get addicted, even if they're terminal. I mean, if you're going to be dead in a week, who cares if you get addicted to morphine if it's taking away your pain and allowing you to die with dignity? So I was really upset. When I saw, and it wasn't that the doctors and the nurses weren't doing their best, but they were limited by the strictures that were placed upon them by their profession, by the government, and so on. And, I told my wife, I says, I'm going to write a book and call it Medicine's Temple of Doom. And she says, no, wait a little bit on that. Don't write a book when you're angry. And so I just started researching this, and that was in 97. And really, this talk, in a way, is about a lot of that, because since I started getting back on herbs, and things like that, and living in a natural way that I believe is clearly outlined in the Bible, I have not been sick really since about 1995. I haven't had a cold, I haven't had a flu. I'm really in very good health, generally speaking. I did have a return of the kidney stones, but you see, they say once you get those once, you're going to keep getting them. So since that time, I've learned, and it's funny, I've learned how to deal with them the second time around. And if you're interested, you just take a lot of hydrangea root and gravel root, which is also known as Queen of the Meadow, and that softens the stones so you can, and I passed them without any pain. They didn't even tickle. So praise the Lord. Anyway, so we're going to talk tonight about the basic, the fight that's gone on since the dawn of time between two separate ways of dealing with medicine. And one of them is godly and one of them is not. So let's do a little bit of history here, if I can have your indulgence. Western medicine, almost everybody agrees, and of course there's a whole another branch of medicine from the Far East, Chinese medicine, Indian medicine, but we aren't going to get into that because it would make this all too long and complex. In the West, medicine began in Egypt. And it was interesting because it started out as fairly systematic, but it was also fairly superstitious. It fell to the priesthood. And you'll find this in many, many cultures, is that the religious people, whether Christian or not, were in charge of the healing. And that makes sense because a lot of different cultures, including the Bible, tell us that healing comes from God. So why not have the healing be in the hands of the spiritual people? Anyway, the problem is that they had all of these rules written down. And what would happen is if a doctor had a patient and did something other than what was in the rule book to the patient, and if a patient died, they'd execute the doctor. So this kind of inhibited their ability to come up with new approaches, new ideas. It took away their creativity. And as it says there, it was very superstitious and very dogmatic. Often they would do diagnoses by, cutting up an animal and looking at the entrails or something and then say, aha, you have this disease, or based on if the patient laid on the right side, then it was a certain kind of disease, and if they laid on the left side, it was another kind. So it wasn't real scientific. It remained for the Greeks to really take medicine and make a science out of it in the West. Their civilization, they valued learning, and they created a professional caste of physicians. And of course, the most famous of them is Hippocrates, who probably many of you have heard of because you hear about the Hippocratic Oath that doctors used to take and things like that. So Hippocrates is, even by the medical establishment, he is regarded as the father of modern medicine. And he was a very astute observer of human nature and of the nature in general. And from these observations, he was able to do a tremendous amount of good. He really revolutionized medicine, took it away from superstition, and brought it in the realms of science. And he's the one who coined the term that we're going to look at in a few minutes called vitalist. Because that's what I am. I'm a vitalist. And I'll explain what that means in a few minutes. He also came up with a primary dictum of healing. Above all, do no harm. That was the primary, rule. If you see the Hippocratic Oath, that's the number one rule in the Hippocratic Oath. Interestingly enough, now this is why they don't take the Hippocratic Oath anymore in medical school. It's also, there's a line in there about, I will give my patient no poisonous substances. And another one is I will not give any woman a substance to cause her to have an abortion. So obviously, the medical profession has gotten way off from where Hippocrates was. Now, at the same time, there was another philosopher named Democritus, and he coined the term atomist. He said that basically Hippocrates was wrong. Hippocrates was too superstitious. So the vitalists believe the body has an inner life force or soul, and that God gave it the intelligence to heal itself if it's treated right and nourished properly. And that makes a lot of sense because, for example, out in the wild, you don't see a lot of sick animals. I mean, you don't see a moose out there with a walker, because he's got arthritis. Or you don't see animals in the wild getting heart disease or cancer. And that's because they're eating what God intended them to eat. Now, you do see those things with our pets, with dogs and cats, but that's because most of those animals eat what we eat. We feed them, they sit there at the table, like that, and we feed them table scraps and so on. So, this is the idea. The word vitalist comes from the Latin word vita, which means life, and it basically means that there is a power within the body to heal itself that God gave us, and if we just get out of its way and let it do it, it will. Now, on the other hand, these atomists, the followers of Democritus, deny this. They were sort of the Sadducees of medicine. As some of you may know, the Sadducees in the Bible denied the spiritual world. They denied the resurrection. And they believe that the body can be reduced to ever tinier and tinier parts, which can be replaced or else, somehow plunged out, like we're plumbing, basically. And that's like what an angioplasty is. That's what cardiac surgery is. Okay. Now, the key word for atomists is control. They believe that nature is not good, that nature is out of control, and that we need to force it to be in control. And so, as I said, the body is like a plumbing system where the parts can be unclogged or replaced. And they will often use drastic measures like drugs or surgery to force the body to do what is wanted. Okay, now let's say you're an atomist. What would you do with a patient who had a fever? Well, you assume the body is stupid, that it's malfunctioning in some way. And so what you would do is you would give the body something like aspirin to take down the fever. Now, what about if you were a vitalist? If you were a vitalist, you would assume that if the body has a fever, it's because the body knows what it's doing. You would assume that, and as we now know today, that there is no virus, no bacteria that can live in temperatures higher than 105 degrees. And so when the body is fighting off, when the immune system kicks into high gear because there's a virus or a bacteria, you get a fever. And if you let that fever run its course, and in fact even enhance the fever by putting the person in a tub of very hot water and giving them hot yarrow tea to drink, which is a sudorific, which means it makes you sweat, you'll basically sweat the toxins out and you'll be fine in just a couple of hours. But if the atomist is allowed to do things, he will take the fever away, so then the body can't get rid of the virus and the person gets sicker, and then he says, oh, well, we'll give you antibiotics to get rid of the bacteria. Of course, the trouble is the antibiotics cause even more problems, and so then the person is even sicker. So it becomes a vicious cycle. Now, on the other hand, back to the atomists. They are not oriented much toward preventative medicine. It's really only been in the last 20 years or so that atomistic type doctors have looked at prevention. They used to just think of the symptoms. Okay, you come in, you've got a headache. They would not think, okay, why is there a headache? Or let's say you have a pain in your toe. They just give you something to take away the pain. They wouldn't worry about why it was there. And so you take away the symptoms, you've taken away the problem. And I tell people this would be a little like if you're driving a car and let's say the red lights come on your dashboard. So what you do is you reach under and you snip the wires that make the lights go on. And you keep on driving. Everything's fine, right? No more symptoms. Until all of a sudden, because you have no oil left, your engine seizes up. Not a good deal. Now, these groups the atomists tend to be invasive. They like to poke things into you. They like to stick you with needles. They like to cut you up. And a good example would be you got swollen tonsils, tonsillitis. So naturally, what do? They cut them out. Now, here's the thing. Let's say, for example, I hit my thumb with a hammer. It's swollen and it hurts. Let's cut it off, right? You don't need this thumb. That's what they do, Or let's say, for example, you're thinking, in fact, I got to tell you this, my wife, because we were in the generation, I'm let's see, what am I, 53, where they were cutting out everybody's tonsils. And my wife even her parents got a benefit of a twofer sale. Her brother had to have his tonsils out because they were inflamed, and so they said, well, bring your other daughter in and she can have them out for free. Even though she wasn't sick, they took out her tonsils. Now we know that tonsils are an important part of the immune system. But the doctors at least didn't know that then. And so Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, who wrote a really great book, it's called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Pediatrician. And he said the only mistake God ever made was putting the tonsils too close to the surgeon's knife. Because you could just reach down there, down the throat, anesthetize the person and snip. $5,000, just like that. And the funny thing is that they took my wife's tonsils out because they said, well, they might get swollen someday. And that's like saying, well, I'm going to cut off my thumb because someday I might hit it with a hammer. I'll never hit that thumb with a hammer if I take it off, right? So, and of course they do things like they give you aspirin if you have headache pain, and then they do various forms of cardiac surgery, right up including the rather drastic thing of taking your heart out and putting some other poor sucker's heart in. I always thought that was kind of unfair because it costs like $50,000. They get the heart for free. You're a heart donor. You don't, like your family doesn't get 20 grand because you give them a heart. That would be unethical. And so they take the heart and put it into you, and then they charge 50 grand or something. So anyhow, now there is and I don't want to sound like Stan said, I love doctors. I think doctors are some of the most wonderful people because they've gone to a great deal of expense and effort to learn their craft. It's not their fault that the people that are teaching them aren't telling them the whole story. They're trying to heal people, and they're getting very frustrated. But there is a place where atomism works real well, and that's in the emergency room. Like if you break a leg, you don't want to just, take some white willow bark to take away the pain when, you got this hunk of bone sticking out of your leg and you're walking around like this. No, you want to have someone go in and set the bone. Or if you're in a car accident or some other thing where you're really banged up bad and you're in massive pain, hey, give me some morphine, especially since the FDA says we can't have an herbal extract from the opium poppy, which is a natural herbal pain reliever, which is what they make morphine out of. So, I say there is a very good place, and these people are, if you watch an emergency room team work, they're awesome, and I highly respect them. But the funny thing is that's about the only place where this stuff is good. Now, how about vitalism? Well, here the key word is helper or teacher. God is viewed as the healer. Hippocrates said that. He says, I have never healed a single patient. God is the healer. And, he was a pagan, for heaven's sakes. He was a Greek. He lived 400 years before Jesus. And, yet he understood that. He was just there to facilitate the process of healing. Vitalists believe in allowing the body to do what it's supposed to do. They're less symptom-oriented. They're more prevention-oriented. In other words, they believe in teaching someone, note the teacher thing, in how to live a healthy life to do away with not only the symptoms, but the cause. Okay. The main purpose of vitalism, as I said before with Hippocrates, above all, do no harm. Don't hurt the patient. Observe and listen to the body. Assume the body has a wisdom all its own. Teach the patient to heal him or herself. Use of nutrition and other non-invasive procedures to facilitate healing. We don't believe in puncturing the skin. See, the skin is a marvelous line of defense. God gave this skin to us, and how many of you realize that even your sweat, which we assiduously rub off and put anti-deodorants and antiperspirants on, the sweat on our bodies is antibacterial. Did you know that? And the skin is marvelously made to keep out disease. So what do the atomists do? They say, oh, it's time for your flu shot. Right through the skin. They take a live virus and put it right in the skin. We don't believe in that. And in fact, if you hear an herbalist talking about injections, I hate to tell you, but what they're talking about is an enema, which means you take some herbal tinctures and inject it up the rectum. And you don't, and understand, that's not penetrating the skin. Because, see, there's a solid tube from the mouth all the way down to the anus. And that's all your skin. The body is basically a big tube with arms and legs attached. So we can go to McDonald's and get a Happy Meal, right? Anyway, so we treat with herbs, with massage, with hydrotherapy, aromatherapy, and nutritional consultation. Because most people have some dietary issues that they need help with. The proper place of vitalism is everywhere else except the ER. In fact, it's funny, Dr. Andrew Weil, I don't know if you've heard of him or not, he's he's an MD, but he's into this complementary medicine, which means he combines herbal and vitamins with regular medicine. And he says, actually, what we call MD or chemical medicine should be the alternative. And it should be the last resort. And that 95% of what most people suffer from could be dealt with by herbs or therapy or acupressure or something like that. Okay, atomist approach, as I said, is great for car accidents, head trauma, etc. Now, let's move on in history. From the time of Hippocrates on, essentially medical history is a philosophical battle between the vitalists and the atomists. It's a conflict between man wanting to control and being willing to submit to God's wisdom, between man wanting to control versus wanting to be willing to admit to God's wisdom. And this struggle is still going on today. Now, during the intertestamental period, in the time of Jesus and the apostles, it's important to realize that basically vitalism was what was practiced. And the Greek medicine, you see, was outstanding, as I had mentioned, and it was kind of captured by the Roman Empire. See, Rome, when they took over Greece, they realized Greece had an incredible culture. They even stole all their gods. How many of you know, they took, Zeus and made him into Jupiter. They took Hermes and made him into Mercury, and so on. So they also captured Greek medicine. and the Greek doctors. And that's part of the reason the Roman legions were so powerful and so unstoppable, is they took their Greek doctors and their herbs with them, and then what was neat is they planted, as they went, they planted herbs everywhere, kind of like Johnny Appleseed, and so they spread all these wonderful medicinal herbs all over Europe, wherever they went to conquer. Now, the next big thing that happened was Galen. Now, Galen was a doctor in the city of Pergamos. How many of you know what the city of Pergamos is called in Revelation? It's where Satan's seat is. That's Revelation chapter 2, verse 13. And basically, Galen tried to pretend that he was a follower of Hippocrates, but he really was not. In fact, this is the guy, this fellow, just for your information. You all know this four temperament thing that's been going around the church for about 10 or 15 years now. That I think Tim LaHaye started it. That you're sanguine and choleric and melancholic and I forget what the last one is. But anyway, that's from Galen. He got that from a pagan philosopher and medical doctor from nearly 2,000 years ago. Galen lived 130 to 200. And many of his methods were very dogmatic rather than scientifically, but he was an enormous influence. He basically, because the church glommed onto him, the Christian church and later on the Catholic Church really endorsed him, he became sort of the rule for almost 1,400 years. And that was the Dark Ages, the collapse of the Roman Empire. And what happened is in about the 2nd, 3rd century, there started to come around these monks. Because what had happened was the church had begun to get very worldly once it kind of married itself to Constantine and the Roman Empire. And so to keep themselves holy from all of this debauchery, some of these monks went off by themselves to just pray. And Benedict was one of the great founders of the monastic systems, the Benedictine order, and he encouraged monastic medicine, and they were the custodians of herbal lore. And he started the first hospice, and a few centuries later, these same monks started the first hospital. So notice, people who were followers of Jesus, or at least trying to be, were the people that started hospitals. In 805, medicine, and then it was called physics. So you were a doctor of physic or a physician. That's where our term today, physician, comes from, began to be taught in a university. And the famous monastery of St. Gall's had an herb garden and a hospital attached. And this became very common. William of Salicito in 1210 to 1280 set up the first school of surgery. Now, at 1347, we have the end of the world. That's what it was called. The plague showed up. What we call today bubonic plague, Yersinia pestis. And this was a very, very horrible disease which wiped out almost a third of Europe. And the herbalists didn't know what to do because it was so new and it was a different kind of disease, and it also spread so fast because of superstitious hygiene practices. What do I mean by that? Well, see, the pagan Romans were really into bathing. They had public baths, and you may have seen pictures or maybe been over to like Italy or Europe, and they had these huge viaducts, these aqueducts they were called, marvelously engineered so they could bring in water. No matter where you were, you'd have fresh running water. Great engineering. And so they would have all these baths where they would bathe, and it was like a social thing because they bathe in the nude with both sexes, and so it was, when the Christians saw this, they thought this was a little bizarre, and so they backed away from that, and they got the idea, somebody, I think it was Augustine, who was an early, Catholic writer, got the idea that it was evil to bathe. You didn't want to bathe any more than you absolutely had to. And so, the more holy you were, the less you bathed. And in fact, the famous saint, Thomas of Canterbury, when he was killed in the cathedral that is now Canterbury Cathedral, and they took his body to prepare it for burial. They had to chip his clothes off with a mallet and chisel because he had not bathed in like 20 years. Now imagine what these people smelled like. And, and of course the other thing is the garbage was just chucked out the window. If you had a chamber pot, as they were euphemistically called, you just throw it out the window. And if somebody was walking down there, too bad, There was no sewer systems. There was no way to get rid of garbage, food garbage or human waste or animal waste. I mean, the streets were full of manure. You'd walk like ankle deep in manure everywhere you went, both human and horse. And in this kind of a thing, this really spread. The plague really spread. Now, along came a gentleman who did much good, but also much damage. This is the founder of modern medicine. His name is Paracelsus. His real name, you ready for this, is Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. For reasons that are obvious, he changed his name to Paracelsus. And he was an occultist. He was an alchemist. He was brilliant. He was a genius. But he's the guy who popularized the idea of using poison to treat medicine, to treat diseases. And that was the beginning of modern pharmaceuticals. He used a lot of mercury. In fact, the story is told, in fact, Stan was asking me about this today in interviews. How did this kind of new medicine with mercury get so popular? Well, what happened is the Pope, I need to back up a step. A new disease, again, came over from the New World that no one had ever seen before. We today call it syphilis. And it was ravaging Europe because, again, bad sanitation, they had no idea what was going on. The Pope got syphilis. Gee, I wonder how that happened. He probably got it from toilet seat. But anyway, so he called in his herbal healers. They couldn't deal with it because it was new. They had to go back and kind of rethink things. So what happened? He heard about Paracelsus, as this guy was famous. He came in on his mercury, gave the Pope mercury, and the idea is you give something to a patient, and if it doesn't kill the patient before it kills the disease, you're a success. That's how it works. And that's how chemotherapy works. Today, it's the same idea. You basically put mustard gas, because that's what chemotherapy is, it's mustard gas, into a person, and their hair falls out and they feel horrible, and you just hope they kill the cancer before they kill the patient. So, he used quicksilver and healed the Pope. Quicksilver being the old-fashioned name for mercury. And so the Pope said, okay, Daba Daba Daba, I bless you, and you are good, and these evil herb people that tried to kill me, they're bad. And so he declared that all herbalists should be burned at the stake as witches. And he endorsed the people that use mercury. Now, it's interesting, because following Paracelsus, there was an extensive use of mercury and other disgusting things. They'd use insect parts and bug parts, and they'd also use leeches to drain people. A lot of you probably heard of this, because this was going on right up until the end of the 19th century. They would put leeches on you, or they would cut you and let the blood come out, and this was a way they would heal people. And sometimes it worked. A lot of times it didn't. But the funny thing was that the herbal doctors called these other medical people quicks or quacks, and that's where the term came from. But now the medical establishments has flipped that around, and now we're the quacks, even though they're the ones that are using toxic medicine. Now, how many of you realize that George Washington, the father of our country, is the most famous casualty of allopathic medicine, of this chemical medicine? He caught a cold or flu while riding out in the rain, and the doctors came, and first of all, they bled him, put leeches on him. That didn't help. He felt worse. So then they bled him without the leeches. They just cut him and let him bleed into a bucket. And then that didn't work, so he was given mercury plasters. And he felt even worse. And so finally they gave him mercury in internal doses. Of course, I hope all of you know mercury is poisonous. And it killed him. He was basically doctored to death. And he wasn't the last. Now, I've used the word allopathy, and I deliberately didn't really define it because it doesn't make sense to define it until there's an opposite to define it with. There was another form of healing that came along around the beginning of the 19th century called homeopathy. Now, homo is like a word that means like. For example, homosexuals are attracted to the same sex. and homogenized milk is all whipped up so it's all the same. Well, homeopathy is the idea of like cures like. So, for example, if you have a fever, you would be given a tincture that contained a eeny-weeny minute part of an herb that causes fever. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but there are many, many thousands of homeopaths today. In fact, it's the dominant form of medicine in England. Additionally, there is one homeopathic remedy that's still part of modern medical practice, even with the AMA. It's nitroglycerin. You know, those of you, if any of you know someone who has a heart condition, angina, or chronic heart failure, they're often given these little tiny white pills that are made out of nitroglycerin. Now you think, nitroglycerin, doesn't it blow up, you know? And what they're told is if you get angina, if you get chest pain, put one or two of these little pills under your tongue. And that's exactly how homeopathic remedies are taken. There's minute amounts of nitro in those pills, and it does work. Interesting. I'm personally not a homeopath. I know how it works, but I don't really get into it that much. And Hahnemann is the guy who started calling these other doctors allopaths, because allo means different. So they do the opposite thing. If you have a fever, as I've said before, they give you something to take down the fever. Now, by 1825 in this country, allopaths, in other words, the chemical medical type doctors, were the dominant form of doctors. But the homeopaths and the herbalists were gaining fast. This is because their treatments were not expensive, nor were they so repugnant. I mean, would you want leeches put on your body? You know, would you want mercury plasters put on your head? No, no. They also worked. Golly gee willikers. Even the press was opposed to these MDs. This is what some of the newspapers said about this controversy. Quote, "To many people, the interests of the medical profession as a whole were opposed to the best interests of society." Another article condemned the, quote, "rigidly anti-innovative attitude which the old school doctors have so consistently maintained for centuries." Now, in the middle of this, along came a fellow named Samuel Thompson. And he's a very famous and very popular, very iconoclastic individual who was a herbal healer. And he basically, his philosophy was very simple. If someone came to him and they were sick, the term he used is he would puke them. He would make them throw up. He would give them lobelia, which is an herb that's a wonderful herb. But if you give someone a lot of it, it's an emetic. It makes them throw up. And the interesting thing about lobelia is if you give just a tiny dose to someone who's nauseous, it'll make them stop throwing up because it's a nervine herb. But he would make them throw up all the bad stuff, and then he would warm them up with cayenne pepper. And 9 times out of 10, it would work. It would work really good, because that's usually what's going on with your body. Your body is trying to get rid of toxins, either through diarrhea or dysentery or nausea or the sweats or whatever, and this just aided the process. And then the cayenne would strengthen the person and give the person energy. The common people loved him, but the doctors fought him. And one time he made the mistake of going to New York City, and while he was practicing there, he was accused of murdering a patient. And it was false, because the patient showed up at his trial to testify on his behalf. He wasn't even dead, you know, but he still got thrown in prison. So he actually became, and it's funny to say this, he became the first multi-level marketer. He figured out that if he practiced medicine, he could get in trouble, because he wasn't a doctor. So instead, he made patent medicines and sold them to people who sold them to people who sold them to people, you know, just like Amway or Shackley or whatever. And he made a lot of money doing this, and he really started getting the doctors on the run. Now, there was also another movement. It was called the eclectic movement. And this was started by an herbalist named Worcester Beach. And this guy worked and qualified to be a real medical doctor. So he was trying to combine the best of both worlds. And he did a lot of scientific research and study in the field of herbalism. Because of the enormous success of these people, the medical doctors started to be threatened financially. Like the herbalists were so effective that by the middle of the 19th century, a typical herbalist or homeopath was making $4,000 a year, which doesn't sound like much, but back then it was a lot of money. The typical medical doctor was only making $1,000 a year. And that was because no one was going to them. You had to be desperate to want to have somebody put mercury or leeches on you. Now, it's interesting. The oldest professional medical society in America is the American Institute of Homeopathy. And not to be outdone, in retaliation, the AMA was founded in 1847. This is where the conspiracy really gets going. This is the politicization of medicine. John D. Rockefeller got involved in the struggle. See, and all of you know he's part of one of those names, you know, that you always see in conjunction with the Illuminati and the elite and what have you. And he was trying to sell crude oil in bottles as a patent medicine. And it wasn't going very well. And he got the idea, well, what if we created a whole chemical medicine industry to rival what was going on with the herbalists? And so Rockefeller and Carnegie poured millions into the AMA to bolster chemical medicine. They took out advertising. They owned their own newspapers, some of these rich guys, and so they attacked the herbalists, they attacked the eclectics and homeopaths. There were some other blows that happened about this time to U.S. health. One of the worst was the use of the steel roller mill to refine whole wheat grains and sugar cane, thus creating white flour and white sugar, two of the most toxic substances anybody ever has consumed in the history of mankind. Also in early 20th century, manufacturers learned how to hydrogenate oils. And of course, that has caused lots of problems. 1930s, they used more toxic solvents to get even more oil out of plants. Now, this is kind of strange. Because of what was being done with the steel roller mill, doctors even started noticing an extraordinary thing. The people that were eating these bread products were suffering from malnutrition. They weren't getting any vitamins because these breads were nutritionally inert. In fact, you can put some white flour on a shelf and those bugs won't eat it because they know better. So the grocers love it. It'll stay there forever. That stuff will outlast the pyramids, you know, because nothing will eat it except us, you know. And so they said, well, let's add vitamin B vitamins to an iron to the bread. You know, and how many of you can remember when Wonder Bread first came out, you know, build strong bodies 8 ways, you know, and then it was build strong bodies 12 ways. And it's a joke, you know. I heard a doctor say this. He said, imagine if you were walking down an alley and some guy mugged you. He took all your money, he took all your clothes, and then gave you back your socks. That's what they did to Wonder Bread. You know, you're walking around naked, but you got your socks. That's about what it is. This stuff is totally useless as food. You could get more nutrition eating the wrapper. Okay, so they passed this Enrichment Act. And then finally, in 1950s, and this is within almost all of our lifetimes, food processing reduced the ratio between potassium and sodium in most foods. Okay, now we have the coming of the drug lords. And the use of chemical drugs got worse because Rockefeller got together with a big German chemical conglomerate called IG Farben. And IG Farben are the wonderful people that brought us mustard gas, and Zyklon B, the gas that was used in the concentration camps. They also brought us, and you see, if you take all of the chemical companies today, the drug companies, you know, Eli Lilly, Merck, and so on, and trace them back, they all go back ultimately. The head of the octopus is IG Farben. And so they came up with the idea of using the waste products from the petrochemical industry and turning them into medicine. And what's interesting is you'd be astonished at how much of the medicine today, even the over-the-counter stuff, is entirely made out of petroleum. Like, for example, if you buy Centrum vitamins and take those, the body will look at them and say, what is this? This is petroleum. I can't use this. And basically, it will go out in the draft, as it says in the King James Bible. And some of you, if you've ever heard the Dead Doctors Don't Lie tape, you know the story. But it's true that if you're in the porta potty business, like for fairs or whatever, you'll find hundreds of Centrum and one-a-day vitamin pills in the latrines, in the porta potties, because the body just poops them right out without even touching them, because they have no nutritional value. You might as well be chewing marbles. In fact, you might get more nutrition out of the marbles. And all these ideas were born out of the idea that they could create a magic bullet drug that would cure anything. And of course, out of that came antibiotics. The wonder drug, penicillin, that would cure everything. And of course, now we know what happened. We started using it. We started overusing it, and now we're in a big mess because we've started getting these superbugs that are resistant to penicillin, to oxacillin, to tetracycline, and you got flesh-eating bacteria and all kinds of ungodly stuff. You see, it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature. Okay, now these drugs are toxic. By definition, the FDA says a drug has to have side effects or it can't be a drug. So even the most benign drug you can think of, aspirin, for example. We all know aspirin can cause stomach problems. It can cause bleeding ulcers if you take too much of it. It can cause your blood to get too thin. Now, this is interesting. The definition of pharmaceutical medicine is giving patients sublethal doses of toxic medicine, of toxic chemicals. So in other words, you're giving them just under what would kill them. And that's medicine. So much for the Hippocratic Oath. If you go to the PDR, which is this huge book, the Physician's Desk Reference, it's like the Bible that doctors use. 150 pages talk about the good things drugs do. 2,850 pages talk about the bad things drugs do. So you can see it's not a real good trade-off. Now, why do we do it then? Well, because there's a huge amount of money involved. Huge amount of money. In the U.S. alone, the drug companies have revenues of over $100 billion. And internationally, it amounts to 3 times that amount. And with that kind of money, these companies can exert enormous influence. You've heard the golden rule, them that has the gold makes the rules. So the drug lobby, that's not the one Jesus had in mind, by the way. The drug lobby has incredible power in Washington, D.C., and the pharmaceutical giants additionally endow medical schools with millions, thus exerting control over what doctors learn. Well, also what doctors earn. Huge advertising budgets also. They will see, and I'm sure if any of you watch TV or read magazines, it's like every other ad is a drug ad. I just love those ads because on the first page, you see these happy people out in nature, and they're all glowing with health, and the colors are vibrant and wonderful and beautiful. And, and then you turn the page, in this little eeny-weeny, 7-point type print, there's column after column after column of all the bad stuff that can happen to you if you take the drug. But they know, most people, especially if you're like me and you're over 50, you can't even read that. It's so tiny. So anyway, then we get into the infamous iron triangle, which I've already alluded to. The FDA allows, in fact, encourages drug companies to make enormous profits. The people who work for the FDA later go to work for the pharmaceutical companies. The FDA seems to exist. It's supposed to be here to protect us. It's supposed to protect our food. It's supposed to protect our water. It's supposed to protect, us from bad drugs too, certainly. Is it doing that? No. In fact, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But what it does do is the FDA does prevent us from accessing a lot of really important information about herb supplements and drugs. And they control what the medical students learn. Also, there's a lot of government censorship. See, drug companies have no economic interest in promoting herbs because they can't make any money off them. See, you can't patent an herb. Why? God made the herb. You can patent Tylenol because some company made Tylenol, but you can't patent echinacea or golden seal because it's just out there in the field. Anybody can grow it. Anybody can pick it. And so there's no money in it to speak of compared to the amount of money you can make off of a prescription drug. Therefore, the FDA has rules that prohibit people from learning how vitamins and herbs can help their conditions. Additionally, all the training most MDs receive is pharmaceutical based unless they take the initiative and spend their own hard-earned cash. And I don't know if any of you get Time Magazine, but just this last week before I left on this tour, Time Magazine had a story about how finally, after years, the American Association of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers has issued a guideline to stop giving doctors all this free, what they'll do is a new drug comes out. The doctor will get an ad saying, you can go down to Cancun free on us for a week and get some important in-service training about the new drug Ghibli bomb, or whatever they call it. And, and then they get down there and they can play golf, they can surf, they can lay in the sun, they can gamble in the casinos, and a couple hours a day they have to sit through some in-service training. And then they get lots of free samples. And I'm sure all of you have been to a doctor and he's giving you free samples of a drug. Well, that's how they get them. Well, finally, and believe me, this was getting to be a scandal. Both the AMA was starting to disprove of it, and even the pharmaceutical companies said, let's stop this. Because they were sending doctors off to Hawaii, doctors down to the Caribbean, and giving them all sorts of free benefits, free golf clubs, this, that, and the other thing. Also, okay, I talked about that. Now, what about the profits? These profits are huge. Now, just let's look at an example. Let's take Celebrex, which is really advertised a lot right now. A typical consumer price for 100 tabs of Celebrex, 100 milligrams, is $130. How much does it cost the drug company to make that? 60 cents. That's a 21,712% markup. I wish I could do that with my book. Man, I could sell one book and retire, amen. Here's Prozac, everybody's favorite drug, Prozac. $247 for 100 Prozac capsules. It cost them 11 cents. You see why that's such a huge cash cow? That's a 224,973% profit. And then there's the ever popular Xanax, which is a highly addictive drug, by the way. Costs $136. It actually cost the drug company a little over 2 cents. So that's a 569,958% profit. And, can you justify that? What will the drug companies say? They'll say, well, we have our research and development costs. It costs us a lot of money. It costs us millions and millions of dollars to bring one of these drugs to market. Now, there is some truth in that, yes. But there's other issues here. The FDA artificially keeps prices high. If you look at this chart, you'll see, first of all, quantity, the name of the drug, quantity and potency. Then the purple is the U.S. price. The green is the European price. The pink is the Canadian price. So, for example, Cipro, which we're hearing a lot about right now because of anthrax. Well, that costs $87 for 20 Cipro tablets. In Europe, you can get it for $40. In Canada, you can get it for $53, $55. Or Prozac. Prozac, $91 for 20 capsules. In Europe, it's only $18.50. And in Canada, it's $20.91. You could just drive, 800 miles north or whatever it is, and, but that's illegal. The FDA, if they catch you crossing the border with your Prozac, you'll get busted for illegal drugs, even though it's the same drug. And if you try and go on, there's all sorts of websites you can go to where you can buy drugs over in Europe. You have a prescription, it's a perfectly legitimate prescription. You give them the number and they'll sell you the same drug at like half the price. But if the FDA catches it going through the border, why aren't these guys watching for terrorists, Anyhow, if they catch it, they confiscate it and you're out your money. And plus, the FDA has put pressure on these other countries to shut down these operations. Just like, we put the squeeze on Colombia to shut down the cocaine thing. And they refuse to let foreign drugs in the United States. And here's the hypocrisy. The FDA has told Congress that the drugs over in Europe are inferior to the drugs we make here in America. What they don't tell you is the raw materials that the U.S. drug companies use to make the drugs here come from Europe. So it's a bunch of hypocrisy. Drug companies patent drugs and then charge very high prices. But the problem is that now they say, oh, it's research and development costs. What they don't tell you is that most of the research and development is done at our expense at the National Institute of Health. Think about that. You know, here's a taxpayer-funded, awesome laboratory. I mean, this is like the state-of-the-art world laboratory for doing biochemical research in medicine. And our tax dollars are paying for it. Then when they come close to discovering some wonderful drug, the drug company snaps it up and patents it. And then turns around and we pay for it twice if we buy the drug. Additionally, not many new drugs that come on the market are really new. They're just tiny variations on old drugs. Why do they do that? Well, like, for example, let's take Prozac. You saw the kind of money Prozac is making. Well, the patent on Prozac is running out. There's not much they can do about that except, you know, try and bribe the generic companies, which they sometimes do, to not make generics. So what they do is they make Prozac Jr., or they make Son of Prozac, or they make Luvox, or they make Buspar, or whatever. You know, and these are just drugs that are just eeny-weeny tweaks in the original formula, so it doesn't take that much R&D to bring those things to market. Now, the Bible tells us we should count the cost and things. Many drugs are quite effective, and like I've said, I mean, like when I had kidney stones and they were kicking up and I had back, you know, kidney pain in my back, I went to the hospital. I says, hey, give me drugs, man. You know, that was okay. But they do carry a price beyond the dollars. Because they are toxic, many drugs attack the very body systems they're supposed to help. And I'm going to give you an example. I wish I had time for more than one. Cardiac disease is the #1 killer in America. These are the common drugs that are given to people for cardiac disease. ACE inhibitors are prescribed. They cause zinc deficiency. Zinc is absolutely essential for muscle function and also for what are called sphincters or valves to work properly. Gee, does your heart have some valves in it? Yeah, it does. Beta blockers deplete coenzyme Q10 and melatonin. Now, some of you might not know what CoQ10 is, but it's a coenzyme, which actually means it's a vitamin, but not really. And it's very helpful to the heart because what it does is it energizes the mitochondria of your cell, which is the energy factory within each and every cell of your body, to give the muscles energy to work. Now, of course, the heart is the one muscle that, you know, beats all the time. It never rests. You could be fast asleep and your heart's still lub-dubbing away, you know, lub-dub, lub-dub. So it needs CoQ10 desperately. In fact, if any of you in here don't know this, if you have heart problems, you should be taking CoQ10, at least 100 milligrams a day. It's a little expensive, but believe me, it's worth its weight in gold. Calcium channel blockers deplete potassium. And remember what I said before about the fact that since the changes in diet in the turn of the century, Americans are getting far too much sodium and their potassium-sodium balance is out of whack? Well, if you deplete potassium, it makes the energy pump that's in every cell of your body work that much less efficiently. And that means your heart is going to work less efficiency. Digoxin, which is a major heart stimulant, depletes calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and vitamin B1. Hydralazine, another key drug, depletes CoQ10 and vitamin B6. You absolutely have to have vitamin B6 for your heart to work. So the very drugs that are supposed to be helping you are actually, and it's like basically what happens is once you get on these things, unless you take these supplements to help your body out, and then take more than normal, in fact, you're going to be on those things the rest of your life, and probably in ever-increasing doses. And of course, that's what the medical, or at least the pharmaceutical companies want. They want you hooked on these things. Now, we talk about the drug war and everything. Believe it or not, far more people die every year from prescription drugs than die from illegal drugs. I mean, you could take all the people that die of heroin overdose or meth or ecstasy. We're hearing a lot about kids dying. And I'm not diminishing the tragedy of kids or adults that die from illegal drugs. What I'm saying is it's nothing compared to the people that die from killer drugs. And see, here's the difference, okay? If you are an adult or a young person and you're dumb enough to get into heroin or meth or ecstasy, you know it's dangerous. You've been told by your parents and your teachers and the DARE program or whatever the heck, that it's dangerous. You figure, well, I'm a kid, I'm going to live forever, so I'm going to take this anyway. Ha, ha, ha. What do you know? Well, on the other hand, these prescription drugs, we're told they're safe. We aren't told that they have these, well, we're told they have side effects, but they're kind of minimized. Now, Lancet magazine is like the official journal of the British Medical Society. It indicated the number of deaths from prescription drugs tripled between 83 and 93. Now, JAMA, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association, showed that 106,000 hospitalized patients, that's not the people that are dying at home in their bed. These are hospitalized patients, die annually from drugs. 2.2 million suffer serious complications. And again, these are from prescription drugs. Drug reactions are the fourth leading cause of death in America. Think of that. They're right behind, heart disease, cancer, and AIDS. This is a statement by a guy from Harvard Medical School. Medicine is now a high-risk industry like aviation, but the chance of dying in an airplane accident is 1 in 2 million, while the chance of dying from a medical accident is 1 in 200. Think of that. You look at a big hospital, probably like one you might have in Kansas City, 200 people probably go in and out of that place every day. One of them probably will die, and not just from old age. I already said this, but pharmaceutical drugs kill far more people than illegal street drugs. Now think of this. Drug deaths are the daily equivalent of a jumbo jet crashing and killing every single one of its passengers every day of the year. 290.4 people. Now imagine this. Let's say you're Boeing and you're making jets. And every day, a Boeing jet crashes. Just... You think there'd be an outcry? You think the press and the government would be all over Boeing like a cheap suit? Of course they would. But where's the outcry? Why isn't 2020 and 60 Minutes and all the rest doing big exposés on this horrible thing? We're all stunned because 3,000 people were killed in the World Trade Center incident. But heck, that's just 10 days of what goes on in taking drugs in America. I'll tell you where the outcry is. These news agencies, ABC, CBS, NBC, and so on, are getting millions and millions of dollars from the drug industry, and they aren't going to say much. There's a problem of bias as well. The FDA is very, very slow to react to drug problems. And we're going to talk about that more in a couple minutes. But it's really kind of a scandal. They won't do anything. I mean, it's like, half the country has to be dead before they'll take a drug off the market. Also, there's evidence of FDA preference for drug treatments over other methods that work better. And the other thing that really irritates me, and I kind of alluded to this, is media like television. Almost every night on the news in our area, at least, in eastern Iowa, we get these puff pieces about the wonderful hospitals and the wonderful drugs and this new drug came out and how it's going to help so many women with this or so many men with that or children or whatever and how great this is. And then they downplay the drug deaths. You never hear about them. But man, oh man, if somebody gets sick from a vitamin or if somebody gets sick from an herb, it's practically, front page, 25-point headlines. So, that isn't balanced. That isn't balanced at all. Think of it this way. In the past decade, over 1 million people have died from taking properly prescribed pharmaceutical drugs, and very little is done about it. In the same time, less than 5 people have died from herbs, and yet comfrey is now a controlled substance. It's a very wonderful herb, but you can no longer buy it for internal consumption in any health food store legally. You can buy it if you buy it like in bulk, and it's only going to be used as a poultice or something, but you can no longer get it in a capsule. And that's, I think, a real serious crime against humanity. Forget the human tragedy for a moment. Look at the money. James Duke, who's an awesome herbalist, and he's also a USDA licensed medical botanist, points out that drug reactions cost the citizens of this country $136 billion a year, and the drug companies only make $100 billion. So we're actually losing money aside from losing lives. But like a preacher friend of mine said, if it don't make sense, there's a buck in it. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has taken away two of our precious rights, our right to know and our right to choose. What do I mean by that? Well, it takes away our right to choose what, like, for example, there's a drug, a prescription drug called Hydrogene. Some of you may have heard of it. It's perfectly safe. It's excellent for the brain, especially when you start getting to be my age, but even younger. It has been shown over and over again to really help cognitive ability. And yet, doctors are forbidden to prescribe it for anybody except someone with Parkinson's disease. They can't do it. And this has been around for decades. It's one of the safest drugs around. That's just one sample of that. And of course, our right to know. Well, we're going to talk about that in a moment. For example, the FDA frequently approves dangerous drugs. One good example, it's not a drug exactly, is aspartame or NutraSweet, which the FDA rushed through, and that stuff's a nerve toxin, for heaven's sake. I wouldn't feed that to my worst enemy. And yet it's in all these diet drinks, Additionally, the FDA approves chemotherapy drugs that routinely kill. Also, there's a class of drugs that are called NSAIDs. That stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Acetaminophen or Tylenol would be the best known example. People have died from that drug, even over the counter. People who drink moderate amounts of alcohol and take Tylenol can die from moderate doses of it. It causes serious liver damage. 7,000 people a year die from NSAIDs, and yet it's still on the market. There's 161 cases, according to one study, documented of death from people who took 8 to 10 extra-strength Tylenol daily. Think of that. And yet they don't do anything about it. Xanax. FDA failed to order adequate testing. It never went beyond 8 weeks of clinical trials. It takes longer than that for someone to get addicted to it. Now they found out that Xanax is even more addictive than Valium. If you get off the drug, there's depression, there's seizures and suicide. The drug is harder to kick than heroin. 8,000 ER visits a year are attributed to Xanax due to interaction between Xanax and other drugs. In 1976 through 1985, the GAO did a study and found that 61% of the drugs approved by the FDA had serious adverse reactions that caused the drugs to either be recalled or seriously relabeled. 102 of these drugs were found to have serious enough side effects to warrant withdrawal. Adverse drug reactions put 243,000 older Americans in the hospital and caused dizziness or fainting spells among thousands of others. Approximately 163,000 older adults suffered drug-induced memory loss or impaired thinking, and another 61,000 suffer Parkinson-like symptoms, where you get the tremors and everything. Another 32,000 older Americans suffer hip fractures based on drug-induced falls. And of course, if you're elderly and you fall and break your hip, it's like, a lot of times that's kind of like the beginning of the end, because it just seems to be hard to come back from something like that. Secondly, the FDA suppresses important information about life-saving substances and herbs. For example, vitamin E. Now, we have known that vitamin E will help prevent heart disease since the 1940s. Since before I was even born, we've known this. And yet a doctor is forbidden from telling a patient that if they have cardiomyopathy or some kind of heart disease, that they should take vitamin E. They're forbidden from doing it. If they get caught doing that, they can be fined or imprisoned. Even though there's a stack this high of studies, of peer-reviewed journals that show demonstrable improvements just from taking 400 IUs of vitamin E a day. Think of that. One doctor said, off the record, that if you got every person in America to take 400 IUs of vitamin E a day, you could cut the medical bills of this country in half. Just like that. Because cardiac disease is such a killer in this country, and it would be so helpful. Additionally, folic acid. Now, this is a biggie. For years, the FDA forbade vitamin companies from telling pregnant women and women of childbearing age they needed folic acid in their diet. And as a result, 13,000 children were born crippled with horrible diseases like spina bifida and other diseases that are really, really very, very, you wouldn't want to wish that on an innocent child. And they wouldn't do it. They would not allow it. It's only been really in the last, and I remember walking through an airport a couple of years ago, speaking somewhere, and seeing some ad about some model or someone who's, standing there looking all cute and sexy, and she says, even though so-and-so isn't pregnant, she's still taking her folic acid. And I thought, well, gee, finally. I knew about this stuff 30 years ago. But you see, most women, and most men for that matter in America, don't have time to read these journals. They don't have time to do all that. They're lucky if they can read a multivitamin bottle. We're too busy. The doctors should be telling us this stuff, and they don't. And it's not their fault. They're not allowed to. It's interesting. In a Dietary Supplements Task Force report in 1992, the FDA stated that part of its job, and this is a direct quote, was to ensure that the existence of dietary supplements on the market does not act as a disincentive for drug development. Now that's kind of big bureaucratese. What does that mean? It means that the FDA is supposed to ensure that the existence of herbs and vitamins doesn't cost the drug company any business. That's what they're doing, and they're doing a pretty darn good job of it. Okay, the other thing is it unnecessarily delays the approval of life-saving drugs. It takes 8.5 years longer to get a drug approved here in America than it does in Europe. 2.7 million Americans died due to the delayed approval of just one drug, Enderol, that was approved for use in Europe for many years. And of course, we've already seen how much more all this protection costs us, how much more we pay for drugs than our European counterparts. Now, the other thing is, what does the FDA do about protecting us from contaminants? The official position, you'll be thrilled to know this, the official position of the FDA is that our drinking water out of the tap is perfectly safe. Absolutely safe. This in spite of the fact that there's been a 50% increase in bladder and rectal cancer among those who drink tap water. In the 1930s, the FDA said it was fraudulent to claim that purified bottled water was more healthy than tap water. It spent 22 years litigating against a company that made that claim and ultimately beat them off the market. Is the FDA protecting us to death? For example, the FDA routinely blocks life-saving devices. And I don't have time to go into all of them, but there's many of them that are kept off the market, like defibrillators, like things women can use at home to more readily detect breast cancer and stuff like that, and they keep them off the market for whatever dumb reason. And, also the FDA kills more people than it saves if you look at the numbers. Pesticides and herbicides in modern food production and agriculture are causing much higher rates in cancer. Realize that 60 to 65% of all produce has pesticides in it. Many foods have unsafe levels, especially if you're feeding them to a child. Private labs have tested the same produce the FDA tests, and they find 6 times more pesticides than the FDA does. The FDA isn't doing its job. Meat packing plants. Once every 10 years, an FDA inspector visits a meatpacking plant. You think that does any good? Heck no. I mean, that's why we're getting E. coli in our hamburger. The FDA checks only 1% of imported produce. For 12 years, the FDA failed to protect us against contaminated orange juice. So not only is it doing stuff it's not supposed to do, it's not doing the stuff it's supposed to do. And yet you'd think, what's going on here? Is there a conspiracy? Well, here's the interesting thing. Is there a revolving door between the FDA and the pharmaceutical industry? How many FDA bureaucrats used to work for drug companies or vice versa? In addition to the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us of, is there a medical-industrial complex? Is this why the U.S. is among the sickest nations on earth? Listen to this. A recent USA Today article, this is from 9/25/2000, reported that more than half the experts hired by the government to determine the safety and effectiveness of medicine have financial relationships with drug companies. The USA Today found that 54% of the time they have a direct financial interest in the drug or topic they're supposed to evaluate. The federal law prohibits this. It's not supposed to be happening, but just since 1998 through 2000, the FDA has waived the restriction 800 times. 800 times in 2 years. For example, 8 out of 10 of the members who evaluate the drug Aggrastat, made by Merck, had conflicts of interest. 80%. These figures underestimate the problem because only 52% of those contacted for the survey responded. Finally, according to JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association 26/2002, 87% of experts on the committees have ties to the drug industry. Think of that. So, we've presented the problem, now we need to talk about what the solution is. What does the Bible say about this vital issue? Because God is concerned about our health. And I'm sure many of you know this passage, but if you go to the 3rd epistle of John, 2nd verse, he says, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth." So God wants us spiritually healthy, certainly, but he also wants us physically healthy. Remember, this body is his temple. He doesn't want it full of toxic junk. He doesn't want it all run down. And, you look at the great men of God in the Bible. It says Moses got up to, I think, 125 years old, and it said his strength didn't fail, and his vital force was still with him. That's because he was a vitalist. Not only that, we know people in the old days lived to be 800 or 900 years before the flood. There's a reason for that, and we're going to look at that. First of all, we need to explain the principle of Bible hermeneutics. That's just a big word. It means how do we interpret the Bible correctly. There's an important Bible tool called the law of first mention. And let's look at healing. The first mention of healing indicates that it comes from God. Genesis 20:17 says, Abraham prayed unto God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maidservants, and they bear children. Now, most people would agree, most Christians of whatever denomination would agree that yes, healing comes from God. And we believe the Bible teaches God heals miraculously in response to the faithful prayers of his people. We also want to make clear that even though we believe God heals, we also believe there's nothing wrong with going to doctors if you're sick. And please, again, don't misunderstand that I'm not saying that it's bad to go to doctors or it's evil or doctors are evil. Most doctors are fine men and women. We don't believe God forbids the use of doctors. We just think that there are other ways you can go first, and if those don't happen to work, then go to a doctor. And the first thing I would always say is pray. If you have a headache, if you have a toothache, if you have a backache, ask the Lord to heal it, and he might even heal it. Hallelujah. Now, in the light of the above statement about, God healing, it's evident, I believe, that the vitalist approach is much closer to the Bible, both philosophically and historically. By definition, vitalists believe that God, however they might conceive him, is foremost in healing. Because, again, obviously Hippocrates was not a Christian, he was a pagan. But he still gave God the credit for healing. However, here's the problem. God is not typically discussed in most AMA-endorsed medical schools or programs as a source of healing. Although the funny thing is there are some doctors, like Dr. Larry Dawsey, who are now talking about prayer as an adjunct to healing. But unfortunately, most of the people, and there's nurses that do this, there's a whole movement called therapeutic touch and stuff like that, but it's all kind of new agey foo-foo stuff, and you need to be careful with it. But at least they're starting to talk about this stuff, at least. Now, again, this is not to say that individual MDs might not have great faith in the Lord. I know many fine Christian doctors and many fine Christian nurses and, other health practitioners. So, nothing against any of that. It's just that what I'm saying is there's a general bias in both medicine and psychiatry against spirituality, and especially against Christian spirituality. Now, what about physicians? When we're looking at what the Bible says, we've already noted how this word got started. It was, you recall, the doctor of physic, and it came up during the early Middle Ages. The first mention of physicians in the Bible bears out medical history, which is no surprise. The Bible is always right, that they are Egyptian. In Genesis 50, verse 2, this is the first time the word is used. It says, "And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel." Now, isn't that interesting? The first time the word physicians are used, it is in regards to death and the use of toxic embalming chemicals, because most of us know that, the kind of stuff they embalm people with, you wouldn't want to drink it. Okay. Almost all references to physicians in the Bible are negative, and there you see some of them listed. Interestingly, in Luke 5:31, Jesus underscored the symptom-oriented approach of physicians. He said, "They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick." Now, a vitalist would teach that those who are whole need a good herbalist to help them stay whole. Okay. Another interesting thing just to mention briefly, have any of you heard of the Barefoot Doctor's Manual? I'd be surprised if you had. It's a fascinating book. It's about this thick, and it is the official manual of Chinese medical doctors. And they have an interesting approach over there, which I think we need to copy over here. First of all, they still do house calls. Second of all, they have a policy over there. The way it works is you pay the doctor a small fee every week until you get sick, because it's his job to keep you healthy. And then when you get sick, you stop paying him until you get well. Now, can you imagine what that would do to our medical system over here? Say if you paid think of what we pay for health insurance. The costs are outlandish. If we were to pay our doctors, say, $5 a week just to keep us healthy. And then when you got sick, they'd have to really sweat, to get us going again, But now it's almost, I hate to say it, but it's almost their financial incentive to get us sick and then keep us sick. Not that they would do that deliberately, I would hope. But anyway, the only positive reference to physician would be Jeremiah 8:22, which also contains a reference to the balm of Gilead, which is a healing oil, Matthew 9:12, and Mark 2:17. Of course, there's also Luke, the beloved physician, who's mentioned in Colossians 4:14. Paul talks about him as being with him. And you got to realize, though, Luke would have been trained in the Hippocratic form of vitalistic medicine. He would not have been giving Paul shots and chemotherapy and stuff like that. Okay, now, we need to understand where all this comes in terms of what the devil's trying to do. Because as Stan said at the beginning, the devil is here to steal, kill, and destroy. And part of the way the Illuminati does things is they set up what they call the Hegelian dialectic. Now that sounds like a big word, but it's based on a concept from the philosopher Hegel. And Hegel is like an idol to the Illuminati people. They just love him. And he saw government, the modern state, as God walking on the earth. Now what is that? That's idolatry. And yet that's pretty much what we've got in this country. People expect the government to do everything for them. The government provides them with food, the government provides them with welfare checks, the government provides them with medicine, the government is supposed to provide them with child care. I remember when Newt Gingrich was in office as Speaker of the House, he kept talking about the idea of the nanny state. The state that basically just is there and mothers you all through your life. Now, think of that, and then think of this. Since the power to heal is the work of God, the state must heal. And to heal, it must therefore control medicine. The state always wants our complete loyalty. To do that, it must be the only source of healing, the only healer. God in the Ten Commandments says, "I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not have any other gods before me." Well, that's what the state is saying. It says, "I am the Lord thy God, Thou shalt not have any gods except me, the state. And of course, there's a big conflict here. Why do you think for the last couple of generations, the state has been gradually nudging God out of the picture? You know, I mean, we can't pray in schools. They're removing all symbols of religion from national discourse. And of course, over and over again, the other thing that's happened is that the state has encroached into more and more areas where the Church of Jesus Christ used to minister. Let's talk for a minute about credentialing and licensure, because oddly enough, the same gentleman I mentioned a moment ago, Newt Gingrich, he had an interesting thing to say. He taught a course on Restoring America at a Georgia college, and I happened to get the videotapes. He had a lot of good things to say, although I don't agree with everything he said. But one thing he said is that in this country, we have moved from competency to credentialing. Now, what does that mean? It means basically, it used to be 100 years ago, if you were a good doctor or a good lawyer or a good whatever, word got around and people went to you. If you were a lousy one, you didn't. They didn't come after you killed a couple people or whatever, or lost enough lawsuits, and they wouldn't, go anymore, and you'd go out of business, and you'd have to end up shoveling manure behind a livery stable or something, I don't know. And that was the way it worked. And it worked pretty well. Well, nowadays, what we have is we have this idea that everybody has to have a credential or a license. And his point is that there's a lot of people out there that might have a license but aren't competent to practice. They aren't competent to do what they're supposed to be able to do because they might have, passed the bar exam or passed the state medical boards or whatever, 10, 20, 30 years ago. But right now, I mean, they couldn't find their way out of their own pajamas without a flashlight. And there are doctors running around that are like that. Every now and then you see these exposés like on, 60 Minutes or something about doctors that are killing people left and right. And the state doesn't do anything about it. So notice this. To license something is to have the power to control it. That's why the state began licensing doctors, licensing nurses, licensing midwives, et cetera, et cetera. And we also have the licensing of preachers. Unless you want to get outside, which I recommend, the little 501c3 paradigm, you need a paradigm shift. How's that for a good new age term? And get away from that stuff. Churches and preachers are licensed. Like, when I marry somebody, they are you licensed as a clergyman in this state? And you see, again, if you can license something, you can control it. And let's talk about the other thing. Let's talk about marriage licenses. Let's talk about birth certificates and social security numbers. I mean, it used to be that was all done by the church. I mean, if you got married, whether it was, in a Protestant church or a Catholic church, you'd get a nice little piece of paper written out by the preacher or the priest or the rabbi or whatever saying, this couple was married on such and such a date by me, and then he'd sign it. And that was all it took. And the same thing with kids. I mean, when a baby was born, there'd either be a baptismal certificate, like if you were Lutheran or Episcopalian or Catholic, or else, there'd be like a little certificate that the baby was brought up and blessed in front of the congregation. And that was all you needed. But nowadays, you got to have all this stuff. And of course, when you issue a birth certificate and give that kid a social security number, you're saying that child does not belong to God. You're saying it belongs to the state. The state has taken its little stamp and said, this is number 483626832 or whatever, And I don't think that's of God. I really don't. Now, here's where the Hegelian dialectic comes in, because what Hegel came up with is the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Try and say that if your upper plate is loose. The idea is, here's an idea. Here's an opposing idea. In other words, there's a conflict or a crisis, and then we bring them together and create a solution. And so what the Illuminati do is they create a perceived crisis of some sort. And then, having created the crisis, they're in an excellent position to solve it. But whenever they do that, you always end up with a little bit of your liberty lost, and a little bit more bureaucrats, a little bit more laws, a little bit more some fool thing or other. So let's look at how this works with medicine. Licensure originally was a response to falsely perceived quackery. I mean, there were all these nasty homeopaths and herbalists and eclectics running around, and they were actually healing people. You know, I have two friends, colleagues, that have literally been run out of the country because they were healing too many people of cancer with herbs. That's why the FDA nearly got chaparral taken off the market, is because chaparral is an awesome herb for dealing with cancer. And it's like they don't want cancer cured because there's a $1 billion industry of people trying to cure cancer when actually it's been cured for 25, 35 years. And, you know, all the practitioners that are doing it are down in Mexico, unfortunately, because they were run out of the country. So anyhow, here's this thing. Okay, if you don't, do the right thing, then you're a quack. Okay, we need to license people so we know that this is a good doctor and this is a bad, nasty doctor. And if you are good, you will have a license. And if you're not good, you won't. Of course, in practice, this is often not the case. But because of that, I mean, look at these people that have teaching licenses. And they can't even spell. I remember seeing a thing a few years ago, and this is God's truth. There were some teachers protesting something or other. It was some kind of, they were on strike. And this one teacher was walking with a sign that said, "Support public education." And it was spelled P-U-B-L-I-C-K. I mean, and that's why now you see that bumper sticker that says, "Support public education." It's P-U-B-L-I-C-K-E-D-U-C-A, and it's all spelled wrong anyway. And again, they have a license, but they can't teach. I mean, it's obvious they can't teach because we're turning out 60% of the kids can't read by the time they reach 8th grade, and that's appalling. But licensing is everywhere now. State licensing and control of medicine and healing is a satanic usurpation of the church's ministry. In other words, they are taking away from God what belongs to God. Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, unto God the things that are God." And your body and the body of your kid belongs to God. It doesn't belong to the state. Remember, hospitals and healing belong to those who were following Jesus for centuries. It's only been in the last, really, 50 or 60 years that hospitals have been big business. Both healing and midwifery were part of the church's historic function for centuries. Now, Satan as a dragon is frequently shown to be a symbol of earthly government. For example, Satan's boast to Jesus in Matthew 4, 8, and 9 when he's tempting Jesus and he says, "All the kingdoms of this world belong to me. Worship me and I will give them all to you." Jesus didn't say, "Oh no, that's not right. You don't have those kingdoms." Unfortunately, every kingdom on this planet belongs to the devil, including, unfortunately, the United States of America. At least the government does. Satan, then, you have various governments such as Babylon that are spoken of as homes of dragons. Jeremiah 51, 37 and 34. Egypt is spoken of as being an abode of dragons in Ezekiel 29 and 3. Now also, let's look at this for a minute. The devil originally had a job with God. He was the adversary. That's what Satan means. It means the adversary. He was like designed to be God's prosecuting attorney. And in Job, it says he was walking up and down in the earth and to and fro upon it. And he was looking for people that were sinners. And he would then go and accuse them before God. And now think about this. Satan is the prosecutor, so is the state. Satan sentences people, so does the state. Satan is even the executor. He executes people, and so does the state. It's the same exact thing. Even historically, many nations have used the dragon as their symbol of government. You see dragons all over the flag of England, all over the flag of Wales, and of course many times used as symbols of the Emperor of China. So, this is a very pervasive idea. Now, the two main healing ministries of the early church were midwives and then spiritual and physical healing. In the light of this, it is interesting to note what is prophesied in Revelation 12. In Revelation 12:4, it says, talking about the dragon, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and it cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, and for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now, you can get all kinds of different interpretations of who the woman is and who the child is. You know, I personally believe the woman is Israel, and that the child is the seed of Israel. But, you know, other people are going to say, no, the seed is the church or whatever. But it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, the dragon here is usurping the role of midwife. And he is supplanting the role of the church. The government is taking over. Whether it is in the satanic medical industry of abortion, or in the encroachment of the state medical regulations upon the church and other natural healers, we see this prophecy being literally fulfilled right before our eyes. I mean, the dragon is devouring millions and millions of babies every year. The government is waiting in every hospital in this country to devour our children, metaphorically speaking, into the system with certificates and social security numbers. The medical industry is also devouring thousands of well-meaning Christians who don't know there's a better way. And I need to talk about this a minute, because my heart is breaking, because I know many fine men and women of God, some of whom are mighty preachers, who have gone home to be with the Lord prematurely because of what the medical system did to them. And because either they didn't know, or else someone had told them that vitamins or herbs were of the devil, that they shouldn't do that. They should just listen to good old Dr. Bob or Dr. Jane or whatever, and not listen to that wacko herbalist quack guy. And I saw, because I tried to tell my own father this stuff. And of course, you know how it is. A prophet is not without honor except in his own house and in his own country. And I tell people, hey, you know, if you can't get your parents saved, don't worry about it. Jesus didn't get his family saved either until he rose from the dead. I mean, that's a pretty good soul-winning tool, amen? You know, come back from the dead, go talk to your family. Whoa! Anyhow, all these people are dying unnecessarily. Christians are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Our nation is getting more and more sick all the time. And what can you do about it? There is another way. Especially now, I believe Christians need to take back charge of their own health and the health of their families. In most cases, we can go back to being our own doctors if we listen to our bodies and take responsibility for our own health. We also need, and this is important, and this might hurt a little bit, but we need to stay away from the toxins which the government and the food industry has laid upon our shoulders as much as possible. Now, here's my broad plan for health. And those of you that saw the Illuminati video, some of this might be a repetition, for which I apologize, but here goes. You've got to be sure your gastrointestinal tract and your colon are clean and healthy. Number two, as far as possible, avoid the white plague of processed foods, white flour, white sugar, white dairy products, etc. Eat as much as possible of wholesome natural foods, predominantly raw. As much as possible, avoid toxic chemicals, and that's not easy because they're all around us. For health challenges, use the powerhouse food that our Lord, the God, the King of the universe has provided for us. Now let's talk about the first issue, keeping it moving. Many Americans are constipated, and this is the source of virtually all disease, is simple constipation. I mean, let's face it. You know, if you've got high blood pressure, you're constipated. I don't mean in your colon necessarily. Your blood vessels and arteries are constipated. If you've got a tumor, it's because your body is trying to encapsulate something because of constipation. If you've got endometriosis, it's because something is constipated down in the area of the female organs. You know, and many Americans, I mean, I'll never forget, I was preaching down in South Carolina, having dinner with a pastor, and he was complaining about how he was having all these headaches all the time. And the guy had I don't want to say anything, but the guy had really bad complexion. I mean, for a guy in his 30s, he just had really bad skin. And I said, well, pardon me for asking, preacher, but you know, how often do you have a bowel movement? He says, oh, about once a week. You know, and the guy was skinny as a rail. I mean, if he stood sideways and stuck out his tongue, you would have thought he was a zipper. But he was really, really sick. Because if you eat 3 meals a day, which he did, and then you have, only 1 bowel movement a week, where's all those other, 20 meals going? Like many of you may have heard, when John Wayne died of cancer, they did an autopsy, and he had like 60 pounds of fecal material in his colon. And how long had he been carrying that? And some of you may have heard this story from me personally, but when I had my little colon cancer crisis, I went to a colonic therapist. Praise God I did. And I lost 35 pounds in one night. And it was all fecal material that I'd been carrying in my colon. And I was eating fairly healthy. Think about that. And if you aren't having 2 or 3 bowel movements a day, you need to go and get a gentle intestinal cleanse. And if any of you have questions about that, I'd be happy to share how to do that. Increase the amount of whole fruits, grains, and veggies in your diet, because that's where you get roughage. That's where you get the fiber that you need to keep yourself moving. And there are some herbs. And I would also say each and every one of you in this room, if you're not doing this, you need to be taking flaxseed. Preferably ground up, because it's harder for the body to digest if it isn't. Especially men, but really all of you should be taking flaxseed on a daily basis, because that's so good for your bowels, it's so good for cholesterol, and it's especially for men who are in my age group or older, it's very good for the prostate. Avoid the white plague. Realize that white flour and sugar and refined rice have probably killed more people in this country than terrorism ever will. And that might seem like kind of a radical statement, but frankly, sugar is the most toxic drug and the most widely used drug in this nation. Why do I say that? Well, because sugar has side effects, and because sugar is not a natural substance. The funny thing is, if you go to some place like the Caribbean or Hawaii, and you take a machete out there and cut down a piece of pure cane sugar right out of the field, and you chew that, and oh man, does that taste good and sweet and everything. It's oddly enough a little like celery, but it's sweet. Or if you take that and grind that into a pure juice and drink it, your blood sugar won't go boing like that, because that's a natural substance. Your body can look at that and say, oh yeah, sugar, I can do this. But when they take that and they refine it, and by the way, brown sugar is not healthy. A lot of people think that brown sugar, all it is white sugar with maple flavoring in it, Some people think that's health food sugar. It isn't. But I mean, that is not a natural product. And it causes so many side effects, and especially, I mean, that's why we're having so much obesity in this nation. I mean, right now, we are the fattest nation on earth. And you know why? And I mean, I struggle with this too. But the funny thing is we got fatter in record time. Just between 1950 and the year 2000, our obesity rate skyrocketed. Yeah, exactly. The fast food industry was a biggie. And I mean, at the turn of the century, the typical American ate 50 pounds of sugar a year. Now they eat 150 pounds of sugar a year. Imagine that. That's more than some of you in here weigh. Think of that, 150 pounds of sugar. And when you drink a soft drink, you're getting 8 teaspoons of sugar. And 1 teaspoon of sugar will completely kill your immune system for 24 hours. And then you wonder why we get sick so often. See, when you take sugar or caffeine, and of course both are in chocolate, so all the people that like chocolate, watch out. But what that does is, and they found this out through clinical trials, is that makes your cortisol jump 300%. What's cortisol? It's a stress hormone. It's what your body releases when you're overstressed. It's a main part of the fight or flight syndrome. It's produced by the adrenal glands, like adrenaline is. And there's an inverse relationship between cortisol and growth hormone. The more cortisol you have, the less growth hormone you have. The more cortisol you have, the less endorphins you have. So it's like the chemicals that are good for you are being driven out of your body by cortisol. So the question becomes, why did God make cortisol? Well, it's called the death hormone for a reason. God tells us that he didn't intend us to live forever after the fall. And so God, and if you actually study the way our endocrine system works, cortisol is supposed to be released in the early morning, like from 3 to 6 a.m. That's when your body is supposed to release cortisol. But if you're getting up in the morning and you're having a cup of coffee with cream and sugar and a donut, you know, the all-American breakfast of champions, then your cortisol levels are going to go up 300% and stay there for 18 hours straight. And that is why so many, because if your cortisol levels are up, your immune system drops through the floor. Because all of the things like growth hormone, and people wonder, why are people aging faster? It's because of all of this stuff, and it's partly just the stress that's in our lives. That's part of it. That also causes a lot of, many people's cortisol levels never come down. Because between the stress in their lives, their boss yells at them, they come home, the kids are, you know, crucifying the cat in the backyard, the wife is yelling at them, they want to, you know, go upstairs and say, Calgon, take me away, or whatever, you know. And then, you know, they go back to work and the boss is yelling at them again. They can't even sleep well at night because they're so jittery from all this cortisol in their system.
I think sugar is a government conspiracy.
Well, it may very well be. And you see, the government is what's behind all of this, because if they wanted to stop this, they could. But see, there's a huge sugar industry. And not only is it just sugar, but like, how about high fructose corn syrup? That's in everything. And a lot of the juices, oh, juices are healthy, right? No, not unless you juice them freshly, unless, or maybe if they're pure organic juice like you might buy in a health food store. But even then, that can't hold a candle to like fresh vegetable or fruit juice that you juice yourself. But see, you know, fructose is really no healthier than is sucrose, which is table sugar, the white sugar you see in the store. And what's interesting is, and I don't know if any of you do this or believe in this, but there's a thing called applied kinesiology, muscle testing. And you can take a guy that looks like, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, big, strong, you know, healthy guy, and you find out how strong his arm is. Have him hold a packet of sugar to his solar plexus, the arm will go down like that. He'll have no strength in his arm. Just because the sugar immediately. I saw a chiropractor do something 20 years ago. He's a sports chiropractor and it just amazed me. He was at the gym, and believe it or not, I used to be into weightlifting. Of course, in the last 20 years, my muscles sort of went south, but, you know, I'm hoping to get them back for the summer. And he had the biggest guy there. I mean, this guy looked like Lou Ferrigno, you know, the Incredible Hulk. And he says, how much can you bench press? You know, typically. And the guy says, 450 pounds. So the guy gets on the bench and he does it, you know, not much effort. He has the guy take just a little, like, tiny Dixie cup full of Coke, swill it around, not Diet Coke, but regular Coke with sugar in it. He just swilled it around in his mouth and spit it out. He sat down, he could not budge the barbell. And the guy was probably ready to bust a gut trying to get that barbell off the rack, and he couldn't do it. Because that's what sugar does to your whole system. It just shorts out everything. And you'll notice, even with dairy products, most dairy products can bind up the colon and produce a lot of excess mucus. And there are people, and I am one of them, that would say if you can get your hands on raw milk that's not pasteurized, it's not homogenized, and that's not easy to do. Every state has different laws about this. Then you're going to get some good, healthy stuff out of that milk. You're going to get the enzymes you need. You're going to get conjugated linoleic acid that you need. You can't get really many other places. You can only get it from either grass-fed beef or from natural dairy. But, you know, there's so much junk, hormones, antibiotics, whatever in your milk nowadays. Let's face it, the hormones they put in milk, what are they designed, or they're actually put in the cows, what are they designed? They're designed to make big, huge cows. And then you wonder why we're getting big, huge kids. I get freaked because I go down to the mall and I see these teenage girls that are like 7 feet tall. They look like, they got acromegaly or giantism or something, and so many, there are more kids now that are obese, young kids, than ever before in American history. Also, you'll find if you get a lot of colds, if you get asthma, if you suffer from sleep apnea, try cutting out dairy. Half the time that will just clear all those things up. I had this one client who had she was on one of those machines they give you for sleep apnea. That's when your snoring issue is so bad you can actually, stop breathing at night, and that's pretty scary. And it cleared it up in a week, just that quick. Because see, mucus is good for you in moderation. Because a lot of your immune system, killer cells and macrophages and stuff, love to move around in mucus. But if you get too much mucus, it gunks everything up. And that's why, you end up having colds and things like that. Isn't this a wonderful thing to talk about? I'm sorry, folks, but this is important. Now, how about fast food and processed foods? Well, unfortunately, fast food will just hurry you onto your grave. There ain't no such thing as healthy fast food. I'm sorry. In fact, but here's the scary thing. Americans spend 90% of their food budget on processed foods. And they spend more on fast food, which is slightly different from processed food. It's like this is processed food and fast food is a smaller circle within the processed food, than they do on higher education. And we feed this stuff to our kids. It's totally nutritionally inert, and it's depleting to your immune system because it has no enzymes. See, all of us are born with a certain amount of enzymes in our body. And I really do encourage mothers to breastfeed their kids. Saying that for you. Because that's the only way your baby is going to get amylase, which is a very, very important dietary enzyme. And because my generation, our mothers were told, it's tacky to nurse your child. Only the poor white trash do that. Don't do that. So hardly anybody in my generation was nursed. And if you were, praise the Lord. But because that's why we all grow up and we have so many digestive problems. The only other place, if you weren't breastfed, that you can get amylase from in a natural, good, healthy source is from bee pollen, interestingly enough. Now, isn't that wonderful that God gave us bee pollen? All those little bees out there buzzing around. Anyhow, every child is born with a certain amount of enzymes, or else they get them from their mom's milk. And if they are fed a bunch of processed, cooked food, that's gone by the time they're 3 years old. All of it's used up. And then the body will start pulling metabolic enzymes to help digest food. And that's not good, because then your body has nothing left to fight disease. And then when our kids get colds and they get ear infections, and what do? You got to put the darn tube in the ear. And no. Feed your kid lots of raw vegetables. Feed yourself lots of raw vegetables. Don't feed them Happy Meals. There was never a more badly named thing in the world than Happy Meals. Now, see, these foods are full of chemicals, hormones, and antibiotics that will challenge your immune system. I was astonished the other week. I was just looking at, it's my hobby to look at food labels. Some people tell me I need to get a life. But that's my hobby. I pray, I have good time with the Lord, and I look at food labels. Sue me. And I discovered it, and I won't name the name, but that a very prominent brand of brats, which, by the way, I would not eat because they have pork in them, but anyhow, a very prominent brand of bratwurst had propylene glycol in it as a preservative. Now, for those of you that don't know, propylene glycol is antifreeze. Can you imagine what that's doing when you're eating those foods? Now, what do you eat? People say, well, what do I got to eat? Rabbit food? Well, do you know any rabbits with colon cancer? Do you know any rabbits that have arthritis? You don't see those bunny rabbits out there with walkers or canes or crutches. No, they get around just fine. You need more live foods, fruits, nuts, vegetables, and when raw, these are rich in enzymes and they'll replenish your enzyme bank. Now you can also get a lot of good companies sell excellent enzymes. And many people, if you're taking Tums, if you're taking Pepcid or Tagamet or things like that, stop it. I mean it, stop it. Because that's just making matters worse. Instead, take digestive enzymes. And if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. You know, if you need to eat meat, try to stick to organic grass-fed beef and free-range poultry. And try to keep this to only 25 and 30% of your diet. And people say, well, that's more expensive. Yeah, you're right, it is. But on the other hand, the more people that eat it, the less expensive it will get. The only reason these farmers are pumping, you know, these poor cows full of all these things and trying to sell us, they're all ballooned out like some gross pustulence or something, you know, is because people are buying it. And of course, who are the biggest consumers of this stuff? The fast food industry. In fact, if any of you want to really have an interesting, I don't know where the book went. Someone ran off with the book. Oh, here it is. We don't sell this here, but Fast Food Nation, this guy is not a Christian or anything, but it's a fascinating study of the fast food industry and how it has changed our health, how it has changed the whole way we live as Americans, and of course now it's spreading around the world. Cold water fish such as salmon and herring are excellent for your heart, and I've already mentioned flaxseed. Now, be aware of this. There's tens and thousands of toxic chemicals in our environment that our ancestors never even had to worry about. I mean, and to understand something, these chemicals can shut down our body's immune systems, they can damage our hormonal response, many cause cancer. And I want you to understand something. Your body can consume things through its skin. You have pores. If you take a bath in city water that's chlorinated, you're absorbing that chlorine, which is a carcinogen, into your skin, because when you, and some of you may know this, when you get into hot water, your pores open. That's the idea behind like a sauna or a steam bath. Well, your pores are opening and you're taking in the wrong stuff. And not only that, what's in your shampoo? What's in your bath gels, your skin creams, your hair creams, all of these things we put on our bodies? I mean, look on the back of them. You know, methylprobalamine, D-lauryl sulfate, you know, all these long words we can't even pronounce. I have a rule. If you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. If you can't eat it, don't put it on your skin. Please. Because we have no idea how much of this is causing problems. First of all, there's the biggies, the neurotoxins like MSG, monosodium glutamate, and aspartame. And those things are pervasive. They're in so many products that everybody thinks MSG is in Chinese food. Well, yeah, some Chinese food it is, some it isn't. But it's in a lot of other stuff as well. And of course, NutraSweet, aspartame is in everything. It's sweet, you know, the diet drinks and so on. Chemical-laden shampoos, sodium lauryl sulfate. That's an engine degreaser. And everything on this list is cancer-producing. DEA, diethylamine, diethanolamine, anyway, propylene glycol, antifreeze, alcohol, which is in mouthwash, aluminum deodorants, fluoride, which is in toothpaste. That's another interesting. Do you know why we have fluoride in toothpaste? Government conspiracy and mind control. No, not entirely. It's because fluoride is a waste product of the aluminum industry. And we can't have any waste in our industry, can we? We've got to squeeze every penny we can, right? And so what do? We put fluoride in the toothpaste, put fluoride in the water. Not a good thing. Excuse me. So I advise people to get, you know, hair care products and skin care products and toothpaste that you can eat. You notice a lot of toothpaste nowadays has a skull and crossbone on it. And they tell you that if your kid swallows this, call the poison center. Because you can die from eating a full tube of toothpaste if you're under a certain body weight. Now, do you want to put, and see, when you're brushing that, it's not just your teeth, it's your gums. And your gums are soft tissue. And they'll absorb that stuff. And see, then what that does is, that goes into your pituitary gland, and it gunks up the receptor sites. Those petroleum products and those chemicals gunk up the receptor sites of your pituitary, and you end up not being able to have the growth hormone release that you need. You know, all the different things that your gland system is supposed to do, it's not really doing very well. Now, this is a very personal subject. Other people like Dr. Len Horowitz and others have gone into it more than I have. I would just, you know, with what I've shared with you about vitalism, I would just hope you'd want to really think twice about having yourself or your kid be punctured and filled with chemicals. And realize that even though they're trying to improve some of these vaccines, a lot of them still have mercury in them as a preservative, and of course mercury is a toxin. This is your choice as a citizen and as a parent. And realize that, like when I grew up, everybody got chicken pox. You know, that was just a common child. Now they want to vaccinate against it. And then you don't have the same level of immunity that if you just got the disease and then, you know, once you got it, then you had the antibodies and you were set for life. And they're doing away with that. And I keep wanting to know why. Is it, I mean, you know, I know there are people out there who are in the ruling elite that literally want to wipe out about 2 or 3 billion people. And they're doing a pretty good job of it between wars and AIDS and what have you. But, you know, so I would just advise extreme caution. I would tell you if I had children, I would not get them vaccinated. And I would never get a flu shot myself. And should you choose to opt out of vaccines, at least so far, you can claim a religious exemption. And even, let me just see, I think there was something. I wanted to talk about something here in a minute. Some of our most basic needs are being attacked here. Most tap water is not drinkable. A lot of bottled water is not much safer. You know, EMF, electromagnetic frequency pollution, is also rising. How many of you realize that there's stuff coming out of your computer screen, out of your TV screen, and I don't just mean bad programs. I mean, you know, there's electromagnetic radiation, which can be very health challenging. Air quality is bad in most large cities. You have pollution, you have interior pollution, which comes from carpeting and paints and so on. And we're all the time seeing more and more cases of people that just are being overloaded with environmental sensitivity, it's called, where they can't. There was this one lady we prayed for a few years ago, and she'd come to church, and as soon as she'd walk into the church, because the pews were like this, you know, they were like upholstered pews, and there was some kind of chemical on the fabric, you know, probably Scotchgard or something, and her whole throat would just swell up, and she's part of the praise team, and she couldn't sing. And when she'd sit on these pews, she'd have to bring her own cotton pillow, because if she sat right on the polyester seat, it would affect her even through her clothing. And she would get a horrible rash unless she covered that whole thing with cotton. It's strange stuff. And fortunately, the Lord was able to set her free of that. But, you know, here's some foods you can eat, and tonics, and I'll explain what I mean by tonics in a moment, that are just awesome superfoods. Chinese wolfberries, lecithin. That's a very good thing, and you can get it from like soy, unless you of course have a soy sensitivity, which some people do. But lecithin is a very good thing to help prevent cholesterol. It's also a very good thing to help with your brain, because it's very rich in choline, which your brain needs to produce acetylcholine. Chinese wolfberries, I should mention, are thousands of times more powerful than vitamin C in terms of preventing, you know, like colds and things like that. Bee pollen and royal jelly, 2 very powerful superfoods. The royal jelly is fed to the queen bee, and she lives like 5 times as long as does the normal bee. Blackstrap molasses, blueberries, raspberries, apricots. All of these things are awesome foods. They're very high in antioxidants. Blackstrap molasses. Green foods such as spirulina, chlorella, stuff like that, very rich in chlorophyll. A lot of you may realize if you have blood disorders or if you have blood toxins, if you get a lot of chlorophyll into your diet, that will really help purify your blood. Because chlorophyll is basically like the blood of plants. It's chemically very similar to human blood. Then, the tonics. Now, what is a tonic? Well, a tonic, when it's used in terms of herbs, is a thing that you can take all the time just for general good health. You know, like you may have heard jokes about Granny's spring tonic. Well, that was like a kind of a wine thing that was made out of dandelions and other bitter herbs, and they were called bitters. And that stuff is very good for your liver and very good for your digestion. And so Granny would make that up every year, you know. So you got Siberian ginseng. And I forgot to put it on this slide, but I can't forget its female counterpart, which is Dong Quai. That's spelled Dongquai. And Dong Quai is a great herb for any female of any age, but especially during your period and especially during your PMS time if you're in that time of your life. Astragalus is a great herb for the immune system. Cayenne is an incredible herb for the heart and for the general circulatory system. I got to tell you this one account. There was this gentleman, he wrote a book about this called Left for Dead, and it's an awesome book to read. But he had a quadruple bypass, and basically it didn't help him. He just felt awful. He had no energy. All he could do was lay in bed, and he'd get up and he'd shamble over to the couch and lay on the couch a while. Then he'd shamble back to bed, and he couldn't do anything. And he was about ready to end it all. And one day his family took him out in a wheelchair in the park, and there was this little old granny lady who just seemed to be all full of energy and just sparkly and happy, and she says, well, what's wrong with you? And he kind of explained that he'd had heart disease and he had a quadruple bypass and he just wasn't recovering from it. She says, oh, you need cayenne pepper. You need just take a teaspoonful of cayenne pepper and it'll fix you up just like that. And so I said, yeah, right, you know, and he went home and he just got worse and worse. And finally he remembered, he was laying on a couch one day and I remember what that lady said. And so he kind of shambled out of the kitchen. He says, well, the worst it could do is kill me and then I'd be out of my misery, you know. And so she told him, take some cayenne pepper and, you know, use water as a chaser. And so he took a teaspoon of cayenne pepper and swallowed it. And then he took water and he just, boo! You know, he thought he was going to die for about 30 seconds. It just like detonated in his esophagus, you know. And then all of a sudden, he felt wonderful. And he had called his son. This guy was like probably in his 40s at this time, because he needed to have someone come over and shovel the snow off the porch, the roof of the porch, because he was afraid it was going to crash in. And he thought, well, gee, I feel good. Maybe I'll just go up there and see if I can shovel a little bit of snow. Now, here's a guy, you know, couldn't even get around. And snow shoveling is one of those vigorous things you can do. You tell cardiac patients, don't go out and shovel snow. And he was out there, you know, shoveling snow. And the guy ended up becoming like an evangelist for cayenne. He started his own little business selling cayenne in capsules. And I'll tell you, you can literally stop a heart attack like that just by putting some cayenne pepper under the person's tongue. They'll probably punch you, you know, but especially if they're not knowing what's coming. But I've seen it done. I have seen it done. Because what cayenne is an excellent blood equalizer. If you've got bleeding, like if you cut even an artery, slap a handful of cayenne pepper on it, it'll stop the bleeding in less than 3 minutes. Now, you might stop to go to the doctor and get it stitched up, you know. And again, MDs are real good for that kind of thing. But, you know, in terms of that kind of thing, it's just amazing. Or if you have a nosebleed or high blood pressure, things like that, cayenne pepper is very good for that. Reishi and maitake are forms of mushrooms that are very strong for the immune system. Alfalfa is the king of herbs. Its name in Arabic means the father of herbs. That's why they feed it to racehorses, because its roots go very deep. If any of you are farmers, you know alfalfa goes real deep into the ground, and it pulls up just an incredible amount of minerals. I try and have a cup of alfalfa tea every day when I'm home. I learned this in herb school, but mix ginger and alfalfa together, and you'll probably never get arthritis. Green tea, powerful antioxidant. Schizandra, another great tonic herb that the Chinese have given us. A lot of these things are from China. Okay, now let's talk about some specifics. Rather than tonics, which are general, these are specific things you can do for specific, and I'm just taking a few of the most chronic herbal type things, or diseases. Excuse me. For cardiac disease, #1 killer in America, hawthorn berries, lily of the valley, cayenne I already talked about. I've talked about coenzyme Q10. Incredible thing. All of you should be taking that if you can afford it, because it is so good for virtually every part of your body, but especially your heart. And wheat germ oil is the best natural source of vitamin E. Essential oils of goldenrod with lavender. There's supposed to be a comma in there. Helichrysum, Idaho tansy, or rose. All those oils are very good for the heart. In fact, it's funny, I know of an oil blend of these oils where if you rub it on this place right here, if you're getting angina or something, just simply rubbing a little bit of this oil blend right here on your ring finger, which goes right up to your heart. That's why this is where you first feel a heart attack coming, is in this finger. See, that's why they put the ring finger, the wedding ring on this finger, is because this is your heart. And it just clears it right up. If you have cardiac arrhythmia, which means your heart beats irregularly and kind of funny, oil of Lang Lang. Very nice oil. Whoops, went too far. Cancer. Everybody's scared of cancer, the big C. Well, I had colon cancer 20 years ago, and I got rid of it just with a cycle of some good herbs like this and some colon colonics, which is sort of like a glorified enema. Normally, we don't recommend that except in extreme cases, because it is an invasive procedure. You're sticking something into the person's, rectum and putting water in there and then massaging the thing. But some people need that. And I'll tell you, my wife, this was back when she was a colonic therapist. She was certified by Dr. Alexander Wood back in the late 70s. She had several people that were terminal cancer patients that she saved just simply by giving them colonic therapy. Red clover is a great blood purifier, and you see, some of these herbs: pokeroot, licorice, cascara sagrada, sarsaparilla, prickly ash, burdock, great blood purifier. Buckthorn, Oregon grapefruit, peach bark, and chaparral, that's creosote bush. You get it all over the Southwest, and that stuff is so good for tumors, for cancer. One of my closest friends was diagnosed with leukemia, and he took heavy courses of just simple chaparral and red clover tea, and he's as healthy as a horse today, 10 years after that. No sign of the cancer. Skin cancer, cleavers is very good for that. Breast cancer, pokeroot and bayberry. Rectal cancer, chickweed. Prostate cancer, red clover, plus obviously changes in your diet. And all of these also you will need to change your diet. At least if you're living on Big Macs and fries and Happy Meals all the time. Solvent herbs for high blood pressure to get the sludge out of the blood: cayenne, garlic, and sassafras. Dr. Shook, who was a great old herbalist, he came up with a wonderful high blood pressure formula there. You see valerian root, licorice root, buckthorn, speedwell, linden flowers, rue, and goldenrod. Dr. Christopher's formula is a little bit safer because rue is kind of a funky herb. You need to know how to deal with it. Ginger, cayenne, golden seal, ginseng, parsley, and garlic. And then essential oil of goldenrod is awesome for high blood pressure. Now, let's say you, like many Americans, you have indigestion. You're popping Tums. You're, taking Tagamet. First, what you need to do is you need to start taking dietary enzymes. You need to eat more raw foods and build up your enzyme bank. Cascara sagrada and water is very good. Now, if you've got that gastro reflux thing that everybody's talking about nowadays, the best thing for that is slippery elm as a tea or as a gruel. Now, it has no taste. So you can just put like a big scoop of slippery elm in like warm to hot, not boiling, because you'll kill all the enzymes in the herb, water, and just stir it up, put in some stevia to sweeten it, and eat it just like a porridge. Now you kind of got to get by the consistency, because it's what's called a mucilaginous herb. That's why it's so soothing, which means it kind of looks like snot. But if you can get past that, it's so soothing. One guy I heard a story of, he had actually esophageal cancer from so much gastral reflux. Because you can get that if you're constantly burping up stuff and everything. It can actually deteriorate the cells in your esophagus to the point that they can become either precancerous or cancerous. And this guy, what they put him on was 3 tablespoons of slippery elm 3 times a day. That's a lot of slippery elm. But completely cleared it up. No more cancer, no more reflux. Elecampane and papaya. Papaya is very rich in enzymes, especially if you're one of those carnivore types that likes to eat meat. Papaya has an enzyme in it, papain, which will help you digest meat. It can, a lot of ulcer type conditions and indigestion are caused by a bacteria, Helicobacter pylori, and you can deal with those with echinacea, golden seal. Ginger, paradoxically, even though ginger is a hot herb, it is very good for the digestion. Caraway and cardamom are also good, and essential oil of peppermint and lavender. I'll tell you, when I started, I used to be popping Tums all the time, and I'm ashamed to say that. But I had some significant digestive issues for reasons I don't have time to go into. And when I started taking essential oil of peppermint, I haven't had a Tums since March, since I started using oil of peppermint. For female issues, best all-around thing you can take if you're a woman from 12 to 90 is red raspberry leaf tea. If you suffer from excessive menstruation, raspberry leaves, prickly ash, blue cohosh, wild yam, and cinnamon. It might interest you to know, ladies, that the first birth control pill was synthesized from Dioscorea villosa, which is wild yam. Dysmenorrhea, and it's funny, everybody always asks, well, is there an herbal birth control? And Dr. John R. Christopher said, yes, orange juice. And everybody says, orange juice? You know what, like before or after? And he says, instead of. There really isn't an herbal birth control pill. There are herbal abortifacients, unfortunately, which I'd rather not get into. But some people will say wild yam does help with birth control. Other people claim it'll just make you get pregnant faster. So, what are you going to do? Painful menstruation, you take squaw vine, red raspberry, uva ursi, golden seal, and white poplar. If you have suppressed or irregular menstruation, amenorrhea, pennyroyal, motherwort, blue cohosh, life-root, and thyme. And some great essential oils for female issues are geranium, fennel, and clary sage. Specifics, pain and headache. Headaches, white willow bark or peppermint tea, essential oil of peppermint and lavender, just clear it right up. Migraines, feverfew. The thing with feverfew, that's an herb, you've got to take it every day if you have migraines, and it will generally keep the migraines away. Also, essential oil of German chamomile, grapefruit oil, peppermint, or helichrysum oil. If you have like muscle pain, back pain, essential oil of peppermint or wintergreen are very good for that. For insomnia, skullcap tea. Now, that sounds funny, but that's actually the name of an herb, skullcap. It has nothing to do with the human skull, believe me. Let me have a little bit of skullcap tea, dearie. It sounds kind of witchy, doesn't it? It isn't. It's just a nice herb that God made. Just has a funny name. A lot of herbs have funny names, by the way. My favorite one is purple loosestrife. Isn't that a neat name? I just love that name. Anyhow, there's another formula that's very good for insomnia is valerian, vervain, skullcap, and wood betony. Now, we all know about hops because you make beer out of hops. But hops are a great herb for sleeping. You can either make a tea, or if you place fresh hops in a pillow, stuff the pillow with hops and sleep on the pillow, you'll go right to sleep. It's very effective. Also essential oil of lavender, valerian, marjoram, goldenrod, Roman chamomile, and orange. Lavender will put you right out. And plus it smells so good. You know, essential oil of lavender is wonderful. Some final thoughts. You need to get exercise. You need to, this isn't on this list, but you need to drink plenty of good, pure water. But you need the exercise too to get the blood and the lymph system moving. And if you're not in good enough health to go, I'm not saying you got to go out and run 5 miles a day. Walking is perfectly excellent exercise. And if you can't do that, then just stand there and do this. You know, it's better than nothing. And if you can't do that, then buy one of those bouncer things and just stand on the bouncer and do this. You know, anything, because that's what helps get your lymph going. Juicing. There's nothing better than fresh juice from fruit or vegetables. Understand the basic principle. Juices from fruit, and fruits generally, are cleansing. Vegetables and vegetable juices, if they're raw, are building. So fruits cleanse, vegetables build. And you need to have both, obviously. Then there's the Sabbath. And I'm not one of these people that say if you don't keep the Saturday as seventh-day Sabbath, then you're going to hell. That's not my point. My point is God had a very good idea in that you want to take 1 day a week off. And unfortunately, sometimes Christians, our Sundays or whatever day you go to church, are so busy, it's not really very relaxing. You got to get the kids ready, and you know they're screaming, and you got to do this and you got to do that, and it's not always real relaxing. So I say, everybody, maybe it's a Saturday or whatever, but try and take a day off where you can just kind of relax and unwind, go out in nature, enjoy God's creation, be with the Lord, be with your family, you know. Also, unless you have some human health reasons that would prohibit it, pray about fasting 1 day a week, because that gives your body a rest. It gives your whole digestive system a rest, and plus, it's a powerhouse spiritually. If you have something you really want, go on because a 1 day fast is not usually going to endanger anybody. And by fasting, I'm not one of these people that says you can't brush your teeth or you can't drink water. I mean, drink water, but you know. And just, it'll really be very good for you. Plus, it will really increase your spiritual power and intimacy with the Lord. And finally, I think we need to really be praying more about making our homes into sanctuaries. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done. But, you know, between the idea, a lot of us, you know, maybe we have like the family altar, you know, where hopefully we gather for devotions. That's one way of doing it. But also, make it a peaceful place. Try not to have loud, raucous music, violent TV shows, violent video games, you know, stuff like that. Try to keep it a place of peace, because, you know, all of us have to be out in the world, or most of us do anyway, you know, working in the hurly-burly of the everyday world. And it's pretty rough out there. I mean, between traffic jams and noise and people yelling at us at work and this and that and the other thing, it is not easy to keep the peace that Jesus wants us to have. And we need to have some place where we can come as a retreat. And I know that's sometimes not easy, especially if you have children of whatever age. You know, some parents have their kids living when the kids are 40, you know, but I mean, you know, do whatever you can to move in this direction, because God wants us to have peace. And the more peace we can have in our lives, you know, the cortisol level goes down, you know, the feel-good chemicals go up. In fact, I've alluded to this in some of my other talks, but they've actually done studies where they found out that people that praise God, their endorphin levels go up just by doing that. And endorphin levels are very healthy for you. They're very good for you. So, you know, do what you can in that area, because, you know, it says in the Bible in the 119th Psalm, "Great peace have they that love thy law, and nothing shall offend them." And a lot of Christians are kind of walking around with this big chip on their shoulder because they're, you know, it's like everything offends them. And yeah, hey, there's a lot of offensive stuff out there, I will grant you. But I mean, if you're really walking with God and you really love His law, you know, you should have peace. And your home ought to be a place of peace. And I really think that that is where we need to have the rubber meet the road, so to speak. So, Basically, I think as we bring this to a close, I think what you all need to understand here, again, I want to highlight that we are not trying to bash doctors or the medical profession, because they're victims of this. Just like, in a way, you could kind of compare them to the Mormons or the Masons. They're part of a large system, which is really a religious system. They have, they have their little theologies. The germ theory, for example, is a theological belief that diseases caused by germs. There's no evidence for that. No evidence at all. Pasteur, who came up with that theory, by the end of his life, he said it was horse hockey, to quote Colonel Palmer. So, Potter on MASH, he actually disbelieved in it by the end of his life, because otherwise we'd all get sick, and we all don't get sick. People who generally love the Lord and who eat right, get plenty of rest and plenty of exercise, tend not to get sick as much as other people do. And it's funny, if you interview octogenarians and centenarians, people who are over 100, virtually every single one of them has faith in God. Most of the people, I've never seen anybody, these people, I've interviewed them on TV, they're all Christians. They all have a very strong faith in God, and most of them had pretty hard, active lives, And some of these people you see overseas, like in China and in Hunzaland and other places like that, they work hard all their lives, and they're still working hard when they're in their 120s and their 130s. They're out there, farming and carrying wood up and down mountains, and they aren't sitting in a nursing home vegetating. Some of these guys are still having children when they're 100 years old. We need to take some pages from them. So anyhow, hey ladies, wouldn't you love to be pregnant when you were 100 years old like Sarah? Amen. Hallelujah. So anyway, God wants us to be healthy. And God doesn't want us ensnared in a medical system, which is unfortunately, however good the people that are running or are part of it are, the overall system, I think, is getting increasingly ungodly. And I read a website the other day from a Dr. Merkala, who's a medical doctor, and he basically says more and more experts that look at it are saying the medical system in America is dying. It's terminally ill, and they aren't going to be able to jumpstart it. We need a new, fresh look, and we need to especially bring Jesus back into our nation by taking him seriously and his teachings and his life seriously. Because that's most of the problem. Because I believe God can heal us without herbs. Amen? He can heal us supernaturally. And I've had supernatural healings in my life many times. So, by way of bringing this all to a close, we've talked a lot about health, a lot about the conspiracy, and we've taught some about the Bible. But there are other things that are important as well, and that's getting into the whole area of the man we've mentioned frequently tonight, and that's Jesus Christ. And for those of you that are out there, maybe you're seeing this video, and you don't know really for sure what you think of Jesus, and you don't know for sure if you believe in him, or what it means to believe in him. I want to kind of talk just to you for a minute, because we haven't talked a lot about Jesus compared to most of these Prophecy Club tapes. And I want to just say that in my personal life, Jesus Christ brought me out of a tremendous number of terrible things, including drug addiction. And he is my Lord, he is my Savior. And I want to explain what that means. Because a lot of people acknowledge that Jesus lived, and there was a guy back there 2,000 years ago, and I guess he was crucified. Yeah, that's interesting. That's not what it means to believe in Jesus. That's like believing in George Washington. He existed. Believing in Jesus that way will not save you. What you need is saving faith. And the best way I know how to describe that is, if you see a chair sitting across from you in your room, and you say, I believe that chair can hold me up. But until you actually go and relax and let your body plop into that chair, you really haven't trusted the chair and really believe that it would hold you. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, if you really believe in me, if you really trust in me, you'll relax, if you will, into me and let yourself trust in what I have done, because that is the difference between Christianity and all other religions. A lot of people think Christianity is a religion. It's not. It's a relationship. And Christianity is about a relationship with a man who is also God.